If you want to compare it with factory default, you just push one of the other AGC macro or the AGC buttons. Okay, then the last window, which is really there for the program itself. I don't think you have to use it that much, but it is there in case you want to troubleshoot. And this is basically debug and settings window, which first of all will show you the version. As well, it will show you some messages being sent towards the Orion, and it will also allow you to change the scheduler interval and as well the scroll bar sample rate. To begin with the scroll bar sample rate, the scroll bar sample rate connects to the two sliders, and it basically means that the moment you start moving the slider, it will wait for another 500 milliseconds before taking another sample. In other words, if I move this slider here within 500 milliseconds, it will only send the appropriate values after 500 milliseconds, so all the values in between will not be sent. If I make it very small, so I move it here to 100 milliseconds for example, and I would move this slider bar, and you can see at that moment the debug window going up. Let me show you. At that moment you can see at that moment that every 100 milliseconds the slider bar value will be sampled and being transmitted towards the Orion, which means a lot of messages being sent to the Orion, which is not always the best thing to have. The scheduler interval basically allows you to create more space between each command, and therefore you can share the COM port with other programs. As well, you can make it a little bit more easy for the Orion to process all the commands. But it comes as a punishment. If you make the scheduler interval too high, you have to wait a long time before it's ready. Right now, by default, is 20 milliseconds. And what happens here right now is that if you push a button or you move something, it will basically collect all the commands to be sent to the Orion. It will put it into a queue, and then the queue will be emptied every 20 milliseconds. And then basically each command will be sent with a 20 milliseconds interval. And that goes pretty quick. So if I push, for example, an S5 button for threshold, you can see right now it will do the, it will first switch to the program mode. It will send a threshold value of 12.2. Then it will confirm the program mode again, and it will put basically attenuation to 0, because that's what I selected here downstairs. And that basically will be sent every 20 milliseconds until the queue is empty. If I make the scheduler interval larger, for example 900 milliseconds, the biggest one, and let me clear the debug window just to make it more clear. Now if I push, for example, the S6 button, watch what's happening. The queue will be filled, of course, very quickly, but then will be emptied with an interval of 900 milliseconds. That's the first, second, third, fourth. So about like 3.5 seconds to 4 seconds. And that allows you basically to make it more relaxed for the Ten-Tec Orion. The other thing you have here is basically you can enable or disable debugging. And again, you don't really need it, but you can use it if you like. The AGC proc only mode, I recommend you to keep it on. I think it's useful for people to use that. And then the special feature KTDT basically is a workaround for the Ten-Tec firmware, where the firmware does not accept the threshold value if you do not reconfirm the program mode. I consider it a bug within the firmware. It has taken me a long time to find out. But what it really means is that every single time you want to do something with the AGC mode or the AGC chain, you have to basically confirm the changes by hitting yet for the second time the AGC mode button. So in this case I will program in RMAP, which basically means the proc mode. I send the threshold value, and then I have to say again proc mode. Otherwise it does not accept the threshold value correctly, it doesn't activate it. This concludes the presentation, and I hope you appreciate it. And oh, hold on 1 second. No, it does not conclude. The one thing I forgot is basically the Orion AGC profile settings. There is a little scroll bar, numeric scroll bar here, and right now it's using set number 1, which is the default, 566, which is Orion 1, with this type of version. Actually, this is Orion 2. Okay, I changed the file then. And then you can basically scroll basically to other sets, and you can see the slider bar changing as well to appropriate values. And in this way, you can use any value you like, which is best matching your firmware on your Orion. Let me open the settings file. Let me go there. So you can see right now in the My Documents folder, there is something called an AGC profile number 2, which is the configuration file. And let me open it. So there you go. So this is the configuration file, and you can see here right now on the left, you see set 4, 2, 3, 1, and 5. It doesn't care about the sequence. It does care about having 5 sets. And what I did basically right now, I actually flipped this configuration line, this profile setting for the Orion 566, Orion 2, with the firmware 2039D, to be actually set number 1, which means when the program starts, it will always start with set number 1. And if you are an Orion 2 user, of course you don't want to start with a Orion 1 version. Now in my case I have an Orion 1, so I will change it back. So I change set 1 to set 4, and I change set 4 to set 1. Then of course I have to save that configuration file. Cannot create because it's claimed, of course. 1 second. I need to close the program. Let me do that. And now I can save it. Yes. Okay, it's saved. Let me restart the program. Let me move the window. So I connect again to the COM port. And then you can see right now that because of the change I made, the first set is the Orion 1 with the firmware 1372. And then I can click on the buttons and play around again with it like always. One other function which is nice, suppose you are an S5 and your RF gain is 66% and the threshold is at 17 whatever microvolts. Suppose you want to return it quickly to default, you can just click the threshold field, then it will go back to the default, which is for this given profile 3 microvolts. And if you click on RF gain, it will change to 100%, which is also derived from the configuration file. So let me show you where that's being stored. So set number 1, there is a pair of attributes. The name is default, then the RF gain is 100, and then the threshold is 3. And then for example the button S2, we have a similar pair. The S2 button has the RF gain of 80 and the threshold of 3. So if I would click on S2, you can see right now that the RF gain is changed to 80 and the threshold stays at 3 microvolts in this case. If I look at S4 for example, the button S4 has an RF gain of 72 and a threshold of 8.27. So let me click on S4. And you see right now it inherits this attribute 8.72, 8.27 for the threshold and the RF gain of 72. Again, you are free to change this as long as you maintain the same structure and use capital letters and well, don't mix up the set numbers, that you are not going to create the set number 6 because the program will not read set number 6. This concludes the